Eyes on Longmont, offering a diversity of topics about our community that will inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy this edition of Eyes on Longmont.
I've spent most of my life in Longmont. I was a little kid here in the 1940s, about 5, 7 years old, something like that. One of my pleasant memories is going out on West 9th Avenue, about 2 blocks east of Hover Street, which in those days was dirt, to a place that was called the Gunning Place. And it actually would be the north side of the hill on which the Sunset Park Golf Course Clubhouse sits today. We went, I remember going with my mom, and we picked sour cherries. They were sold by the pound, bring your own container, and they were probably 10 or 15 cents a pound, something like that. So we picked cherries there, and I remember one of the things that was kind of interesting, in addition to sour cherries, they had a tree with what are called Queen Anne cherries. That was a really special treat because they were maybe not a predecessor of Bing's, but they had some of the same taste qualities of those. In addition to picking cherries there, I also recall going up to Lyons. There were cherry trees and more apple trees than cherry, actually, on the North St. Vrain Highway and the South St. Vrain Highway. Today, the North St. Vrain area where the apple trees were is called Apple Valley Road. And on the South St. Vrain, it's called Old South St. Vrain Road. And there was a fellow there named Buck, and he had all kinds of apple trees. And we stopped there and bought apples, apples for canning, apples for eating. So growing fruit in the early days of Longmont was a popular thing and something that I very much have fond memories of.
When living at Byers, which was a dry country north of Byers, and in the 30s in particular, and maybe in the 30s, we would come up to pick apples in this vicinity around Broomfield. It was a vacation day for us. It was usually in October, and we'd pick several bushels and take home, and they would last half the winter.
There's quite a long history of fruit growing in Boulder County. I would say that the peak would have been back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we think of kind of settler times here, and especially before there was a lot of refrigerated and frozen produce being shipped all over the country. So for the local markets here in Colorado, people had to grow their fruits here. And so there was quite a lot of that production. And around Boulder and up here in Longmont, there was quite a lot of fruit production, especially berries, apples, and tart cherries. This region never has been, nor probably ever will be, the perfect climatic and soil area for growing these fruit crops, but it can be done. And so at those times, it was really needed because there wasn't a way to ship fruit around. Then once the interstate highway system was developed, as well as transcontinental refrigerated freight trains, then there was a huge shift in the marketplace and production, and a lot of fruit production went to the West Coast growing areas such as California, Oregon, and Washington State, and the demand for fruit to be grown here locally kind of dried up because the climate and soils in those areas is considered ideal, and with the shipping and the low cost of fuel in those days, it seemed like a no-brainer. Stop growing fruit here, ship it in from elsewhere.
You know, I don't think that you really have a consciousness of things that are leaving your environment necessarily. And I know that over the years, fruit trees have kind of slowly disappeared from the community, although I do see a few apricots and pear trees around in the community. Sadly, many times the fruit is left unpicked.
There's a lot more we can do and a lot more we can have success with here growing-wise than many people give us credit for. I know that even some of the official publications and experts from my organization used to advise to not even bother trying many of these crops because you just won't have success. And I guess I'm here to tell you that's not quite the case. We do have a lot more things we can grow here. It's been done in the past, and I think we're heading towards a future where we grow a lot more of those crops.
I'm Oscar Carlson, or Oscar T. Carlson. The T stands for Ted. I use that for family name. And I bought this farm in 1958.
Barry Chadwick. I work for Oscar. I worked for him for, 5 years now, I think?
About 7.
7 years. Time flies when you're having fun.
Me, Fernando. I don't know. Is it working for Oscar?
The farm here is about 85 acres, and the apple, we have about 4 acres of apples. The rest is devoted to grass seed production. It was bought on the basis of purely agricultural production. One of the incentives of planting that was nostalgia, because I thought if they could grow apples then, and there were quite a few, apple orchards of 10 acres scattered throughout this area that sold apples to grocery stores and otherwise. I thought it could be, it was nostalgia to say, well, they grew them then, we can grow them now. If you go to a grocery store, you will notice that most of the apples in bags and otherwise come from Chile at this time. They will put them into big containers and take the oxygen out of the air, refrigerate the containers, put them on ships, and they'll come into Los Angeles. They'll be put on a railroad car and possibly go to a broker distributor in Denver, where they will be sold to King Super, Walmart, and all the other companies. So the transportation might take a month and a half, but they're in conditioned and cool conditions, so they come in to be very attractive apples, probably better than most of them that have been stored in Washington for 8 or 9 months. And so when my wife bought, I don't know which, I can't blame it on my wife particularly, bought some apples, and we saw they were produced in New Zealand. That was the other inspiration to try to produce apples at the same time during the summer when most apples are imported. Most apples, other than the few that are stored in Washington State. There had been a lot of advances in varieties of apples that would be tolerant of more of the diseases, and varieties that would mature early in the summertime. So the plan was to plant a series of varieties, and we planted 5 principal varieties that would begin ripening early, which the pristine variety, and then we'd follow with several other varieties that were available until the later variety, the last variety, was Honeycrisp. When I first talked to Extension Service, they gave me a little warning that fire blight would be a problem. It's a disease, a bacterial disease, and that spring frost would be a problem. Those were the principal inhibiting. The soil was good, the water we had, and the climate was good otherwise. It isn't the economic. Okay, orchards normally don't ever become profitable after paying the early costs and so forth and so on. They very seldom become profitable in less than 7 or 8 years in the commercial business. So it has been a hobby as far as economics. Jerry sells them on the farmer's market, and he does very well.
It's a friendly type, family-oriented type affair, and I think it's really neat, but...
Just wanted you to get out of the way so we can get
Okay. Just say, hey, here, taste an apple. And it's like I say, if they'll taste it, they'll buy some most of the time.
Yeah, what is the expression they have after they taste
Oh,
one?
that's good.
There, you put the sign.
Try that.
But a few years ago, a little girl tasted an apple down at the farmer's market. I was there too, and she said, "Mom, that's the best apple I've ever tasted."
Can I have a little bite? That is delicious.
Oh my gosh.
What are honey crisp?
Apples.
They're a surprise.
Are these honey crisp?
Honey Crisp were real nice red apples. They were so good.
But I think I might want redder ones.
Yeah, you didn't try the red ones.
You try them and then make up your mind.
You'll stick with the
I like the sweeter. I like the red ones.
You like the red ones?
Yeah.
Bought apples from this particular man because he used to have Lodi apples, and my grandfather raised Lodi apples, and you can hardly ever find them. However, it's too late for them right now, so I bought Honeycrisp instead.
I come here every year when this man has these Honeycrisp apples. In fact, I bug him until he gets them. And this year, I'm right back at it. And if you've never tasted a Honeycrisp apple from him, you're missing a lot.
Right. I don't know which one. I wish I did.
I drove down here to Longmont to come to the farmer's market with my mother. Right now we just picked up some apples from the farmer. I think mostly we're just going to eat them plain because they're small and crisp and perfect. But some of these other ones that were 10 for $1, I think they're going to make great tarts. Or possibly fry them up with some butter and brown sugar. Maybe put them over some ice cream. So yeah, we got some plans.
I want you to know I picked 35 pounds of apples out at your place, and it makes the best applesauce in the world.
Okay.
You just don't use any sugar, don't use anything, just put them in the pan, a little bit of water, let them cook.
Which
and
kind?
Honeycrisp.
7, 8.
Is that funny?
And 9. And one more makes 10. All right, so we got 10. We have 20 of these.
Okay.
And 10 of these.
Okay.
They could come out in the orchard and pick them sometime next year.
That's what he said last time we were in. So that's where we're going to do that.
Totally tough.
There you go, sir. Oh, hey,
They,
can you
you
say
know,
thank you?
We like little kids in the orchard because they get underneath and pick the ones that we have to lean over to get and miss.
This is for your brother. Sawyer, can you say thank you to the gentleman? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day.
Our idea originally was to market apples entirely in farmers markets, but I was entirely too what? It's not, well, maybe I'll make it foolish. And we planted so many trees that we far outstripped any in quantities of apples that could be marketed in that way. So now we have a pick-it-yourself apple enterprise going to now. My wife takes care of it.
Okay. No, don't pull. Switch. And you turn it. Good job.
Picking apples, and we don't worry about children in the orchard at all because they have such a good time. The feeling that you got when you were a child picking apples comes back to you. It was just something that was almost, it was an adventure. So you see the adventure, I mean, all the people picking apples, almost all of them, particularly the ones with children, it is an adventure for the children.
That means it's really right. This is really good. Okay, I'll hold it back.
This is awesome.
Okay, I think that's all the apples we need.
Good.
After they pick, then they come up and we weigh the apples at $1 a pound, and we always tell them they have to taste a couple before they pick to know what they're getting. And see, there's motive to that because when they taste them, they might pick a third more.
How about we store them in covers and then we eat them, okay?
Well, we only can, I think we should just eat one, okay? Because the farmer said that we can try to see if it's good. Okay, let's pick another one. Okay? Now that we know that it's good. Okay, hold on. Let's make sure it's good. Okay, this one. Okay, hold it and twist it. Yeah, twist. Twist. Good job. That good apple picker. Here, Daddy.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's fine. You see more down there? Maybe we should go to the other end of the orchard for the snow sweet or something.
Why aren't people doing fruit here? If you talk to a lot of people that have been here a long time, the West Slope just outcompetes us. We have hail, we have shortages in water, we have fire blight, and we have a whole list of things that Colorado State Extension knows far more than I do about some of the challenges to fruit production. But again, with time and research and people willing to take some risks, it looks like there's some new varieties that may be able to compete. And that's the biggest thing out there. You may be able to grow the product, but you don't make any money growing something. You make money having a harvestable crop that you can then sell and make it a profit.
When I took this job in 2006, I found the lack of support and the lack of a general fruit growing culture a little disappointing, and I felt through my experiences and knowledge, I knew better. I knew that we could grow many of these fruit crops here. So I initially started with small fruits and berries, and I've been doing trials and demonstrations with that for about 6 years now. It was based on the success I'd had with that work, both in the original research and promoting and getting local growers to start growing those crops and bringing them to market. I was approached by the Parks and Open Space Division, their ag lease agent, who contacted me and said, "Hey, I like the work you've done with the small fruits. What's it going to take for us to get you to do similar work with tree fruits?"
If you think about open space, I think most people when they think about open space, think about hiking, biking, fishing, and those things I think have a more conventional component to open space. However, Boulder County is unique in the fact that protecting agriculture and agricultural culture is a part of our program as well. And in doing so, Boulder County now protects 25,000 acres of agricultural land within Boulder County, and about 16,000 of that is what we consider cropland. So on those croplands, as a department, we don't have the resources or the talent to farm that land, so we lease it back to qualified farmers in Boulder County with the primary goal of making sure that they are good stewards of the land. We know there's that demand for more local food that people think of as probably what they're seeing across the farm stand or through a CSA or farmer's market. So as that desire and that market demand increases, we want to try to meet that on open space, and there's growers that want to achieve that as well. Taking on 1 or 2 acres to grow some carrots or broccoli is hard enough, but when you're looking at something like an orchard where you may be looking at 5 years to prove this crop is going to be viable, and after 5 years you find out it's not, there's a lot of risk involved, especially when you're talking about operations that are 3 to 5 acres, and one of those is going to be something that may be out of production for 5 years and may not even be successful. We came up with a program where Parks and Open Space would purchase the trees, we'd use the experience of Colorado State Extension to provide the cultivars, the information, and the research needed to try to get some fruit production on the Front Range to meet that demand that I think is definitely being pent up here within the county.
The land that we've decided to use for this project is actually an interesting story. Here we refer to it as the Peck property. It's one of the many, many agricultural properties that the Boulder County Parks and Open Space Division owns. Many people think of the open space program as just being mountain parks and trails for hiking, but actually a very significant portion of the lands are agricultural lands, which our commissioners and taxpayers here have decided we'd rather keep those as agricultural lands than see them developed for property, roads, buildings, houses, etc. And so the property that we're using, this Peck property, is currently leased by Mark Guttridge and his family who run Olin Farm.
It's west of the Lobo Trail, in between that and the Diagonal Highway. Mark bid on that property as a growers association, and received that bid, and currently that property is very unique in the fact that Mark has a plan for growing his vegetables and moving some of his operation over there. He's worked in conjunction with CSU Extension and Parks and Open Space to put in a demonstration orchard. We have a small group of individuals that are growing more traditional Indian foods to provide to their community, but also to sell them at farmers markets. And then the Parks and Open Space Department has long been looking for a spot to grow local seeds to do our restoration projects, and our plant ecology group has a small plot over there growing native plants for seed propagation.
Joel Reich is an extension agent who's kind of been focused on nuts and berries and fruit, and was kind of convinced that there should be a lot more fruit production going on in Boulder County, especially in a year like this when everybody has apples everywhere. Yeah. But it's so he has a little trial plot at the fairgrounds there, that little community garden at the fair, and he's had some pretty good success with those different varieties of just dwarf fruit trees, and they've been telling the county that they need to do some kind of bigger scale demonstration to let farmers really see what's possible. And so I was just kind of in the right place at the right time. I knew Joel from some other projects and volunteered to run the project here. So we put 120 trees in. They all survived and flourished this year. And they're even starting to put a little fruit, but it's good the first couple of years just to cut off all the fruit and really focus on establishing roots and branches and getting them where you want to be. So in 2014 we can start getting some yields off of them.
On Olin Farms, we have about an acre that's set aside to do the fruit tree and nut trials. It sounds like a pretty small piece, but again, the varieties are being planted are all dwarf varieties, and I think they're getting close to 200 different fruit and nut trees out on that property. So again, there's going to be a great opportunity for different varieties to be looked at, see how they compete, and out of those, maybe 2 or 3 are competitive. But again, if that's 2 or 3 that now can be taken to the farmer's market, put into CSAs, used for local production, I think it'd be a great benefit for, not only the market farmer, but also a person with a backyard garden that wants to say, why, can't I get a steady variety of cherries or apples in my backyard? This may be just a good overall site to gain information for Boulder County.
The real goal is to, for me personally, is look at 3 varieties that come out of there, and then to go put a full acre just of those varieties and see what kind of works good in that soil and in this climate, and then make the jump up to bigger production based on that variety and tasting. But yeah, they'll definitely, I'm sure they'll end up in the variety baskets whenever they can. Yeah. So what we're doing is looking at new varieties of fruit trees and nut trees that have the ability to produce, but also compete with things that are being grown on the West Slope or in even further away areas like California. So what we're hoping to do with this project is allow Mark to provide his farming experience, us to provide the land and the trees, and then Joel to provide the expertise through Carlos Day Extension. The taxpayers then out of that potentially get the ability to see, here's some new cultivars, here's some new varieties that may not only work for open space and Mark Guttridge, but may work on my property and allow me to gain some new crops, some new markets, and make this something that is competitive here in Boulder County.
As far as selecting what we decided to plant in this project, there were a number of considerations that went in. I already talked about some of the kind of environmental issues, but also I think it's important to have a diversity of these different varieties of fruit for a couple of reasons. One, consumers want diversity, they want choices and different selections. Two, we know from all kinds of, thousands of years of farming history that some varieties will just do better in a certain locale than others will. And part of this process is weeding out those that won't work. Now, of course, I have some hunches and I have a little bit of background in this. So out of the thousands and thousands of named varieties of apples, for instance, there are thousands of varieties of apples. I think that here we're probably limited to somewhere under 100 varieties of apples that will do well. And so I used basically my background. I was in touch with a lot of growers who do have the odd apple tree here and there around our county and around the Front Range to see what's been successful. And then in talking to growers around the country, a lot of different breeders, nursery people, after explaining and conversing with them about our conditions here, got a lot of insights and input from those types of folks about what we'd have the best chance of having succeed for us here. And so, of these 115 trees and the dozens of varieties that are out there, it can be a little sad to think about this, but I fully anticipate that some of them will be failures. And that's part of this kind of research, is accepting a few hard knocks with the success that I also anticipate we'll have, is a lot of success. Based on the budget that I was given to work with here, I ended up with 115 fruit trees going in. That's what we planted here on Earth Day this year.
We had a volunteer day where people came out and we had it was Earth Day. We had a little Earth Day tree planting and had a bunch of people come out and put them all in. It was a good learning experience for everybody. Joel was here describing all the varieties and what we're doing. A lot of people are interested in doing their own trees, so it's kind of a good tutorial how we put them in, how we staked them, tied them up, and all the wind protection, how come we space them exactly 10 feet apart, and so they're all varieties that can bear fruit. Their flowers are a little bit later, so they don't get hit by our spring frost here, and their varieties they're a little bit faster, so that we can get a harvest before the fall frosts come. And they're all dwarfed on the whole apple industry is kind of shifting to like semi-dwarf trees where they never get more than like 10 feet tall.
Mark is the farmer here, of course, and so basically today you're going to help us get this orchard established. Okay, so the map here shows on one side all of the apples and pears, which is referred to as the pome group. Botanically, that's what those fruits are called. And the other side is the drupe block, which is botanically what all the stone fruits, peaches, cherries, plums, that kind of thing, are referred to as. So these 5 rows here are where the apples and then pears will go in. The 3 rows at that end is where all those drupes will go in. These trees are what we call bare root. You can see why, okay? Now, while this looks like just some kind of weak little twig, this is actually a really good quality tree. It's gonna grow for us better than something we bought at a nursery that was potted up into potting mix, believe it or not, okay? And so, a couple things I wanna show you. See this funny little angle here? Okay? Turns out that with fruit trees, it's really important, they're all grafted. Okay, and so this variety up here is Honeycrisp. We all know these Honeycrisp apples, yum, okay? But with all of our fruit trees, they're all grafted, okay, onto some kind of a rootstock that is going to be a much healthier, more vigorous rootstock than if Honeycrisp itself just grew its own roots. Okay, so this is another kind of apple that would make cruddy apples if we let it grow and flower and produce apples. Totally cruddy, little bitter apples. One little bud of Honeycrisp was notched into the bark on here. Once that Honeycrisp bud started to grow, they cut the top of the rootstock tree off, okay? And so in the future, if we ever see any branches coming from this section, we know that genetically it's that rootstock with little bitter cruddy apples, okay? And so those would all be just stripped off, okay? Fortunately, we don't see a whole lot of that, but basically we want nothing to grow off of here. We want our Honeycrisp apples, okay? Turns out, not only does it have a strong and vigorous root system, but this will dwarf the tree on top of it, okay? Because if we just grew Honeycrisp trees or any of these apple trees on their own roots, they would end up being 35 to 40 foot tall trees. A tree like this on a dwarfing rootstock is only ever gonna get about 10 feet tall. We can go 20, 30 years down the road. It's only ever gonna get about 10 feet tall. The canopy is going to be at most 10 by 10. So we keep almost the entire canopy is producing that high quality fruit. Also, it's pickable by hand, okay? Any of the management practices, the pruning, we just throw ladders right out of the whole equation. I know from experience that Honeycrisp grows and works very well here. This variety is a really good choice. What we're going to be looking at in these first several rows is which rootstock is the most appropriate for here, for our soils, for our climate, to grow Honeycrisps on. And I should point out, the goal of doing this whole thing is because nobody's ever done it before, okay? And we have a lot of small growers like Mark here in our county and other counties up and down the Front Range that really would like to be putting in fruit crops, tree fruit crops. How many of you as consumers would like to be able to buy local tree fruits? I would, okay? So that's why I thought, hey, let's do this, okay? Let's put some public funding and public effort into evaluating what are the best varieties and combinations of rootstocks and varieties that we can use so that a few years down the road when these trees start really producing, we can evaluate and I'll be able to give growers throughout our region really solid recommendations so that they don't have to just kind of pick and choose and throw stuff out there and hope that it works. When your mortgage and your paycheck depends on it, you don't want to just rely on hope. You would like to have, or I would want to have, some research to back that up. So that's what we're doing here today. So I dug the hole this deep because I wanted it that deep. I wanted the soil loosened that deep. But if we were just to plant this tree, okay, and here's a couple key things. See that scar from where the rootstock was cut off? we always want that to be pointing north, okay, so this way, all right? So you always want that pointing north, and you always want it to be a couple inches above grade, above the ground, once everything's planted, okay? So you can imagine it's gonna be right about there. So we're gonna backfill this, but if we left all the soil that we just shovel back into the hole, that loose underneath it, it's gonna want over time to settle like that, and we don't want that. So the first thing, let me just grab that. First thing I'm gonna do, and I know this seems a little counterintuitive, we just dug the hole, right? Is I'm gonna put some soil back in the hole, right in the middle of the bottom there. And I'm actually gonna stomp on it a little bit to kind of firm that down. And now, look at that. What do you think? One person can hold the tree and just position it. The other person can backfill the hole with soil. We're gonna allow the water, when we water all these in, we're gonna allow the water to settle the soil down around the roots, okay? We don't wanna compact. There we are. The first tree is planted, okay? Now, hey. Now one of the things you have to keep in mind with these dwarf trees, stake the trees. So what you're gonna wanna do is see these nubbins, okay? You always want those pointing away from the tree, because when we use the wires to strap the tree together, or tie it on here, we wanna be able to kind of hook them on these. So about 18 inches to either side. Zach, you wanna demonstrate how the post pounder is used? So you lift it and kind of give it a little help as it's dropping. See the little shield shape? Okay, so that little shield shaped thing at the bottom there, you want to get that an inch or two below grade. Okay, that's going to just help anchor the post. And then, and here come our straps and wire, right about this height, okay, is where we're going to tie this tree. So we're going to put that around one side, line up the eyelets, put the wire through, and we're going to twist the wire on here. And then somebody holds the tree vertical, get any kinks out of the wire, and then Zach's going to go ahead and wrap the post. Again, same process. And then Zach's gonna pull tension out of there. Now watch this. Watch if we pull real hard. See how that's kind of flexing? We don't need that, okay? So just right there where it's held in place. That's that, okay? Then the last stage of the process is to water it in, but you won't individually be responsible for that. We've got this water tank here, and we'll be running down the rows and watering everything in. So I appreciate, and Mark appreciates, that you're all here to help. So that's what I'm here to do, is make sure you know what you're doing, you feel comfortable, and we hope you have fun doing this. And then we hope that you will come by and watch and visit this orchard over the years as it progresses, and hopefully the whole community, we benefit from this for many years down the road. So the first thing that I think we should do is just start digging holes, because they're all going to have a hole dug for them.
I came out today to help with the orchard because it's a great community project. I've never planted a tree in my life. They told me to bring a shovel. This is what I brought, so obviously I didn't know what I was doing. Great, beautiful way to enjoy our Colorado weather, meet some new people, and as we were just educated on, we can come by here in the years to come and watch the trees grow that we're planting.
This is a special project because it's going to allow for more local produce, which I think is really a great thing in this day and age. I wanted to give back to the community. We go to the farmers market and we love coming to Owen Farm. So we thought we could give something back to them because they give so much to us.
The idea of giving back to the community, not only with the fruits that these trees are going to grow, but also with it's giving back to the environment.
I'm out here volunteering today because it's Earth Day and I love the earth and I'm trying to help it.
Well, there are great folks here putting together an orchard, so it's lots of fun.
I'm not a big fan of grocery store apples, I've got to admit. They're beautiful, they look fine, they're all waxed up and shiny, but they're not very good eating.
The rewarding part is to be able to eat your own apples off the tree. When we pick our varieties off of our trees, they seem to be a whole lot better than anything you can buy in the stores. Well, that's it, I guess.